Bread, glorious bread. It's the foundation of so many of our favorite meals. With so many different types of bread to choose from, the meal possibilities are endless, from grilled cheese sandwiches and French toast to bread pudding and game day sliders. While you may know a good amount of different breads from memory, there are likely some varieties on this list you didn't know about or even forgot about. White sandwich bread. The most basic variation of sliced bread, white sandwich bread is generally composed of a combination of water, yeast, milk, sugar, salt, and sometimes butter, and is frequently employed in fan favorites like grilled cheese or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. While certainly not the most complex variation in the bread family, classic white sandwich bread sometimes gets an unfairly bad rap, perhaps because there are multitudes of less than stellar store-bought varieties languishing on a typical grocery store shelf on any given day. To remedy this, consider learning how to make your own homemade version of basic white sandwich bread and go forth with better grilled cheese. Whole wheat. Nutty, slightly sweet whole wheat bread is one of the most popular loaves on the market and is made with whole wheat flour. This type of flour contains the bran, germ, and endosperm of the wheat kernel to give it a grainy, chewy texture. Whole wheat bread is well suited to everything from a classic turkey sandwich to breakfast toast, and while it's fairly easy to make your own loaf, there are plenty of solid store-bought options. Whole grain. While whole wheat bread is made using the full kernel of wheat, whole grain bread is made using any whole grain flour. Oat, brown rice, barley, and spelt are some of the more popular varieties available. Whole grain bread, like whole wheat bread, generally has a chewier texture and nuttier flavor, although the exact flavor profile will depend on the grain used. Whole grain bread works well in both savory and sweet recipes, especially those that need a sturdy bread that won't fall apart easily. We recommend it in the sweet potato, goat cheese, and arugula sandwich. Sprouted grain. Sprouted grain is another type of whole grain bread in which the flour contains whole grains, but the whole grains are soaked in water, drained, and kept moist in a jar to sprout them, releasing additional nutrients. Sprouted bread, whether homemade or store-bought, does not contain preservatives and will therefore mold easily. We recommend storing sprouted bread in the freezer if you're not planning on enjoying it immediately. Sprouted grain bread makes for a filling, tasty toast surface or a great way to liven up a classic deli sandwich. Multigrain. True to its name, multigrain bread uses multiple types of grain in its flour, and also has a nutty, rich, and textured taste. That said, multigrain bread isn't necessarily fully whole grain bread. In addition to the whole grains used, multigrain bread can contain refined, aka white, flour. If you're interested in making sure your multigrain bread is fully whole grain, be sure to check your ingredient list or make your own no-knead multigrain bread for a tasty base that works well for sandwiches or toast. Rye. A much-loved slice often used in a Reuben sandwich or patty melt, rye bread is made from crushed or ground whole rye kernels and often contains caraway seeds. Light rye bread flour does not contain the outer coating of the rye berry, making it lighter in color and more savory, while dark rye bread is made using the outer endosperm of the berry, or by adding instant coffee, molasses, or cocoa to achieve its rich brown color and slightly sweeter flavor. Marbled rye is made from light rye and dark rye dough that is braided together. Pumpernickel. A close relative to traditional rye, pumpernickel bread is made using a rye sourdough starter and baked for an elongated amount of time, sometimes as long as 24 hours, at very low temperatures to caramelize its sugar and give it a deep, bittersweet flavor. If you're short on time, you can make your own pumpernickel bread using cocoa powder and molasses to bring out the same flavor profiles. Pumpernickel bread's earthy, rich flavor pairs well in sandwiches that have bright flavors like mustard or sharp cheddar cheese. Ciabatta. Known for its chewy, rustic texture and relative lack of rise, ciabatta is a crusty Italian loaf that gets its unique texture from a very wet, sticky dough. Ciabatta's crunchy, spongy loaf works well as the base of a densely packed pulled porchetta sandwich or as a side to a saucy bowl of mussels. Focaccia. Speaking of popular Italian breads, focaccia ranks high with carb fans for its buttery taste and soft, pillowy texture that makes for an excellent sandwich base or pizza crust. While there are many methods for making focaccia, our favorite recipe from Salmon Nosrat involves a long dough fermentation period and saltwater brine proof for a perfectly savory, buoyant dough. Baguette. The longer, thinner cousin of a French bread loaf, the baguette is a chewy bread with a thick crust that's traditionally made solely from water, yeast, white flour, and salt. While the history of the baguette is largely debated, its origins do trace back to France, where the bread remains one of the country's most celebrated culinary exports. Make your own baguette or purchase one from a trusted baker to enjoy for your next crostini or ham and cheese sandwich. Brioche. Brioche is another French bread that's known for its slightly sweet, buttery taste and soft, pillowy texture, thanks to its high butter-to-flour ratio and thrice-kneaded dough. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, it was actually brioche that Marie Antoinette infamously suggested her subjects consume, uttering "qu'ils mangent de la brioche," which is commonly translated as "let them eat cake." If you'd like to take Marie's suggestion, we suggest making your own brioche and enjoying it as your next burger bun or French toast base. Milk bread. Also known as Japanese Hokkaido or Shokupan milk bread, this loaf that's popular in several different Asian cuisines features a soft, cloud-like texture and a mild, buttery, and sweet flavor. Milk bread's enviable consistency is achieved through the tangzhong method, in which bakers start their dough by cooking water and flour together until it becomes a thick and roux-like paste. The soft loaves work well for pull-apart dinner rolls, katsu sandwiches, and mini sandwich buns. Challah, an egg bread traditionally prepared by Ashkenazi Jews to enjoy on the Sabbath and other religious holidays. Challah is known for its super soft, airy texture and smooth, shiny exterior, thanks to the addition of an egg wash brushed on top. Containing neither dairy nor meat, challah is also kosher. Challah is almost always braided and works well eaten by itself or used to make French toast. Matzo. Matzo is an unleavened bread traditionally prepared by Jews during the holiday of Passover. Its unleavened nature stems from the story of the holiday itself, in which, needing to escape Egypt, the Jewish people did not have time to ferment their dough before leaving. Matzo tastes like, and is best employed as one would a large cracker, making it the ideal base for toffee bark, matzo brie, and of course as the building block of matzo ball soup. Pita. Soft but chewy pita is an ancient Mediterranean flatbread that's made by rolling out thin spheres of dough, which puff up during baking to create air in between the bread that forms pita's signature pocket. While readily available at grocery stores, pita is one of the easiest breads to make from scratch. Enjoy it with falafel, tabbouleh, and other easily portable fillings. Lavash. Another flatbread originating from the Mediterranean, lavash is a thin, soft bread popular in Turkish, Iranian, and Armenian cuisine that can be both leavened and unleavened. Unlike pita, lavash remains flat and pocket-free after baking and works well as a wrap. Naan. Naan is a traditional South Asian flatbread known for its soft, chewy texture. Named for the Persian word for bread, naan is usually prepared with yogurt, giving it a rich, slightly tangy flavor, and baked in a clay or tandoor oven. Naan is traditionally enjoyed alongside Indian dishes like chicken tikka masala or less traditionally as a flatbread pizza. A sourdough bread. According to King Arthur Baking Company, a culture of bacteria is critical to forming sourdough bread. The bacteria, which are found naturally in the flour and on almost all kitchen surfaces, feed on a mixture of flour and water. This mixture is referred to as a sourdough starter. Once the yeast settles and starts to eat the starches in the starter, it produces carbon dioxide bubbles, the distinctive flavor of sourdough bread. The exact flavor of the sourdough is dependent on the types of wild yeast present and the type of flour used in the starter. Making your own sourdough starter at home is easy. To start, mix 1 cup of flour with half a cup of warm water in a glass. Cover with a light cloth. King Arthur Baking Company recommends using whole wheat flour, like pumpernickel or whole wheat, because it is more likely to house a rich collection of wild yeasts. The mixture needs to remain in a warm environment to stimulate growth. After 24 hours, discard half of the mix, add 1 cup of all-purpose flour, and pour in half a cup of lukewarm water. Stir, cover, and repeat for the next 2 to 3 days. By the 5th day, you should be able to change the mixture every 12 hours. The sourdough is ripe when it doubles in size every 6 to 8 hours and appears bubbly. Use the discarded sourdough for bread recipes, bagels, or pancakes. Potato bread. Potato bread was initially a food born out of scarcity and substitutions. iFood TV credits Frenchman Anthony Augustin Parmentier for creating the first potato bread recipe and promoting the tuber as the poor man's vegetable. Its American roots date back to the mid-18th century, when early revolutionaries added potatoes, either as potato flour or mashed potatoes, into bread to limit the use of expensive wheat in the household. According to Revolutionary Pie, in New England, potato rolls were called feather beds for their light, airy qualities. Potato bread has many of the same ingredients as other breads like flour, yeast, oil, and water, just with the addition of mashed potatoes. Different cultures around the world add varying ratios of potatoes to wheat flour, notes iFood TV. For example, Kartoffelbrot, German potato bread, contains rye flour, potatoes, and spelt. Prati oaten from Ireland is a traditional Irish bread made from potatoes and oatmeal. Quick bread. Unlike other types of bread, quick bread does not contain yeast. Quick bread surged in popularity in the 19th century due to the advent of baking soda and baking powder. These leavening agents could replace not only the flavor of yeast, but also the time it took to rest, proof, and bake yeasted bread. According to Baking Needs, synthetic leavening agents also produced more reliable results than yeasted breads. Popular quick breads include banana bread and English crumpets. Working with quick breads can be slightly more precarious than with yeasted breads. The leavening agents produce carbon dioxide rather quickly, so the baker needs to move the bread into the oven without beating out too much of the rising power. Quick breads also have a comparatively lower gluten structure, so the dough cannot hold on to the carbon dioxide as easily as it can with a yeasted dough. One of the most recommended methods for working with quick bread is to separate the dry and wet ingredients until the bread is about to go in the oven. This tip, along with avoiding overmixing, will result in a fluffier quick bread. Irish soda bread. Soda bread is technically classified as quick bread, but its connection to Ireland makes it deserving of a category of its own. According to The Real World, the technique of using an alkaline powder to leaven bread was attributed to the Native Americans' use of pearl ash. The Irish replicated the process using conventional baking soda once it was invented in the mid-19th century. The 4 critical ingredients for soda bread are wheat flour, salt, baking soda, and buttermilk. The rural Irish's access to open hearths, iron pots, and griddles also led to the formation of a dense bread with a hard crust. Moreover, the shaping and slicing of the soda bread into triangles is indicative of regional culture, but also tied to myths that making a cross on the top of the bread would ensure sanctity for the household. Modern Irish soda bread contains a diverse mix of sweet and savory additions, including caraway seeds, honey, or raisins. Some varieties are even flavored with treacle and Guinness. Rye Bread. Rye bread was an indigenous American bread born out of forced dislocation and systemic injustice. In an article by Smithsonian Magazine, Navajo families recount the long walk, a movement of their people from their land in Arizona to New Mexico. The new land was not able to sustain endemic crops like beans, so the United States government supplied them with white flour, cane sugar, and lard. These ingredients were fried to produce a funnel cake consistency filled with air bubbles and grease. The Oklahoma Historical Society notes that fry bread varies in toppings and accompaniments. It can be topped with sweets, pumpkin, or chocolate. The commercialization of fry bread has not come without controversy. Although some indigenous entrepreneurs sell fry bread mixes as a way of economic opportunity, many non-indigenous folks sell fry bread, which was once a symbol of stolen land, dislocation, and dominion, as a way to profit from the indigenous culture without being a member of it themselves. If you're looking to try fry bread for yourself, prioritize purchasing it from an indigenous-owned vendor. Beer bread. Beer bread's history is rooted in quick bread and soda bread, according to VinePair. As noted prior, unyeasted bread does not often have the same lift capacity because of the short life of the carbon dioxide within the bread structure. Beer can provide a fizzy boost of carbon dioxide to help the bread become lighter and fluffier. Folks who make beer bread would describe its taste as somewhat hoppy. Altering the type of beer used in the bread can change the flavor of the bread significantly. One beer bread recipe uses a standard lager, but can be substituted for a pumpkin lager in the fall. Adding an oat crust to the exterior of the beer bread could also pair well with an oatmeal stout. To make beer bread at home, combine flour, baking powder, salt, and brown sugar separately from the melted butter and beer. Once ready to bake, combine the wet ingredients into the dry, mix, and bake. The result is a delicious beer bread that takes less than an hour total to make. Flatbread. Flatbread's name is a clear clue to its qualities. This unleavened bread class, which includes naan, tortillas, pita, and roti, was geographically linked to the Fertile Crescent, which is now the modern-day Middle East, according to the Journal of Ethnic Foods. Cultures endemic to this region used flatbreads as a means of sustenance for several reasons. The first is that their ingredients could include cereals, legumes, and pseudo-cereals besides wheat. This meant the recipe was adaptable to whatever ingredients were present. Flatbreads also do not require an oven to be baked, meaning that they could be cooked using sand or hot rocks while the nomadic people were moving from place to place. The thickness of the bread, which can range from a few millimeters to a few centimeters, was also stackable in bags, so it could easily be moved between locations. Cultures have adapted flatbread to local ingredients and cuisines. Indian roti, as noted by the food charlatan, is an unleavened bread that is often buttered with ghee and served with curry. Cornbread. The Institute of Culinary Education claims cornbread is a distinctly American bread with roots intersecting race, region, and class. Indigenous Americans relied on corn as a dietary staple and developed numerous corn products including corn pone, a mix of cornmeal, salt, and water. The Discover South Carolina notes that cornbread containing buttermilk, sugar, and eggs was often indicative of a wealthier household. Households and commercial entities alike have altered the cornbread recipe for regional fairs to include bacon, vegetables, and cheese. The batter can be made as a pancake or as a cake in a cast-iron skillet. According to Kittle, there are numerous regional cornbread variations. Johnny cakes are a thin New England cornbread cake fried on a hot, greased griddle. Hush puppies are a southern buttermilk-based batter fried and served with fish. These balls are most commonly crunchy on the outside and soft and pillowy on the inside. Bagels. Bagels are not only the base of greasy breakfast fare, but they are also a prime example of why bread science is so cool. According to NPR, bagels are poached in water before baking. The chilled dough rings are boiled for between 30 seconds and 3 minutes before being extracted from the water and placed into the oven to bake. The water is typically seasoned with baking soda, barley malt, or lye for flavor and coloring, according to between rounds. Boiling gelatinizes the starch on the exterior of the bagel, resulting in a crispy and satisfying crunch. Many commercialized bagels are instead cooked in a steam oven, which only reaches the surface of the bagel. The result is a less satisfying, puffier bagel with a thinner crust. Brown bread. Brown bread is uniquely a New England food. Brown bread is frequently served as an accompaniment to baked beans and hot dogs. According to Atlas Oscura, brown bread gets its flavor and texture from a mix of cornmeal, rye, and wheat flour. The color primarily comes from molasses. When brown bread was first baked, New England's climate was not hospitable enough to grow wheat as a sole grain. Early colonists grew corn and rye to supplement their wheat supply. Molasses was a byproduct of sugar production in the South, so the New England colonies had a plentiful supply of molasses for rum, and apparently brown bread too. Gluten-free bread. In conventional baking, gluten provides the structure for a properly risen loaf. But what happens when gluten isn't present? Like gluten-based bread, gluten-free bread uses yeast to develop carbon dioxide. According to the King Arthur Baking Company, gluten-free bread holds carbon dioxide via xanthan gum. Xanthan gum is a stabilizer in baking that makes gluten-free dough stretch and hold the carbon dioxide bubbles that give bread its rise. The Loopy Whisk notes gluten-free bread often contains hearty gluten-free flours including brown rice flour and buckwheat flour. Many gluten-free bread recipes also contain eggs or dairy products for moisture and psyllium husk and potato starch for structure. Bread pudding. According to the Daily Gazette, bread pudding dates back to the 11th and 12th centuries, when bakers made the pudding as a way to utilize bread scraps. By the 13th century, bread pudding was also known as poor man's pudding because it was commonly eaten amongst the lower classes in European society. Bread pudding is a simple way to use old slices of sandwich bread. Small cubes of bread are combined in a baking dish with milk, eggs, vanilla, and spices and baked until crisp. Some bread pudding recipes also utilize high-proof liquor, such as scotch or brandy, to add a boozy twist on a comfort classic. Bread pudding can be topped with ice cream or fresh fruit. Parker House rolls. Bloomberg credits the Parker House Hotel in Boston for coining the rolls term in 1854. A baker at the establishment tosses a batch of unfinished rolls in the oven. When the timer went off, the result was a soft, decadent white roll that was both easy to butter and easy to pull apart. To prepare these rolls, bakers pre-bake the buns together. Then the rolls are finished in an open flame with a layer of butter or fat. King Arthur Baking Company recommends folding butter into the rolls while they are shaped to create even more decadent layers. Cloud bread. In 2020, TikTok users raved about the soft, fluffy, and sweet cloud bread. The recipe was popularized by Abigail Huang Navel on the app and received over 20 million views, according to Matador Network. Cloud bread is not actually bread. It contains egg whites, cornstarch, and sugar instead of yeast and gluten. Cloud bread is merely a sweetened meringue with enough protein and structure to hold traditional toast toppings like butter or jam. The Vegetarian Times claims that aquafaba can be used as a vegan substitute for egg whites in this recipe. The mix can either be prepared using a handheld blender or a stand mixer with a whisk attachment. After the meringue resembles stiff peaks, the mixture is baked in cloud shapes until the exterior is hard to the touch. The Bao Buns. According to the dumpling school, Bao Buns are a quintessential Asian food featuring a meat or vegetable filling encompassed with a layer of white dough. These dumplings were originally made of flour, yeast, oil, sugar, baking powder, and milk. The size and exact fillings of the bao are often dependent on region and culture. In Hong Kong, bao buns are made of rice flour instead of wheat flour due to the compatibility of the crop with the surrounding environment. In Taiwan, bao buns are used as a fast food staple and can be filled with crab, beef, or sweet potato. In Shanghai, the bao are typically made in the style of soup dumplings, filled with a warm broth that is consumed before eating the doughy casing. Pretzel bread. According to German baking traditions, pretzel bread is a delightful fusion of soft pretzels and bread. Known for its dark, chewy crust and soft, airy interior, pretzel bread gets its unique characteristics from a baking soda bath before baking. This process gives it that signature pretzel flavor and texture. Pretzel bread can be enjoyed in various forms from rolls to loaves and is often sprinkled with coarse salt. It's perfect for sandwiches, dipping in cheese sauce, or simply enjoyed on its own. Biscuits. The Washington Post suggests that original American biscuits were much denser than the ones eaten for brunch today. Originally called beaten biscuits, these stodgy morsels got their structure from over-beaten gluten. Once commercial leavening agents like baking powder and baking soda were introduced, biscuits could be industrially produced without the hours of labor in beating, scooping, and baking needed. Sausage gravy became deeply intertwined with the American biscuit during the Revolutionary War. Pork was relatively cheap and easily stripped of its fat during the cooking process, so home cooks would combine the drippings and flour to create a savory complement to a crumbly biscuit. Biscuits are also commonly served with sweet toppings like butter, jam, or cream. In conclusion, we hope you enjoyed this journey through the world of bread. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more delicious content.